Welcome to the Rewild Gear podcast. Modern life, society, and responsibilities have domesticated us. But now it's time to rediscover your adventurous side. Whether that's camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, or just spending time in the great outdoors, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we get back to the wilderness and rewild. Welcome to the Adventure Made podcast, brought to you by Rewild Gear. I'm your host, Seth Spears, and I'm here today with Jordan Jonas. Jordan is a wilderness living and self-reliance expert and the winner of Season 6 of the History Channel's popular survival reality show, Alone, which I really enjoyed watching. Jordan grew up in the mountains of Idaho, and as a young adult, he spent a year riding freight trains across the U.S. where he learned to navigate both rural and urban environments. And I'm really excited to hear some stories from that. He spent 10 years in Siberia, where he lived with fur trappers and traditional nomadic reindeer herders, which is where he learned the art of primitive survival. And during his time on Alone, he spent 77 days in the Arctic while also successfully hunting a bull moose, a wolverine, dozens of rabbits, squirrels, grouse, and numerous fish that he survived off of. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Good. I guess, thanks.
So you have a very fascinating bio. And, I first heard of you watching Alone in Season 6. And I think that was actually the first season that I watched. And so that was, I've always been into hunting and the wilderness and survival and that sort of thing. And so that show was kind of right up my alley. And it was really interesting to see the show and how everyone handled the elements, whether that was the conditions or all the different factors. And what I found the most interesting was that so many people that seemed very well prepared for it, it was the lack of interaction with others where they tended to quit. So I'd love to hear your take on that and how you handled that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's definitely a situation where it requires, you have to have a pretty steady emotional base, and you also need the skills. So what you'll notice probably is usually the people that weren't expecting it to be so hard to be alone, they kind of drop off first, and then there's some people who manage that, but then eventually, you're going to starve. So it really is it is a combination of like the skills and the circumstances and the mindset. You have to, they have to both be there. And it is, the mindset is super fascinating. It was, even things I learned out there would be like, well, for one, it was very obvious, and I've talked about this a lot before, but it was very obvious that you don't want a lot of skeletons in your closet. And I noticed this when I was fur trapping in Russia first, where there I was like 5 weeks alone, and I would just start thinking of every like conversation I didn't have that I should have, and all these little things that you just wouldn't, even if they weren't a big deal, they would just circle around in your head, and you don't really have a way of emptying it. So I think if you had real serious, skeletons in your closet and you went on Alone, they would just come up and eat at you. And I think that would cause a lot of mental strife, and, might be the reason why you wouldn't make it through. So it's the type of thing where I'd recommend anyone that's going to do something like that to get your internal issues in order, get your, make sure you've talked to all the people you should talk to about, issues and whatnot. And that was very obvious. And of course the lessons keep going. I was, for me personally, with hindsight, it was, so the 77 days I was out there, it really wasn't particularly difficult. Like I didn't think I was like at the end of my ropes or I felt like I was just getting started, but
wow.
I had a lot of mental anguish just worrying about the future, like, oh man, I'm going to miss Christmas and then the kids' birthdays, which were way off in the future, or I'm going to eventually eat through this moose and the fish and everything and starve. And that, and I don't have any more. You're only allowed to get, of course, one moose and one. So you're only allowed so much. And so then you have all these worries about the future. And honestly, although I can honestly say I enjoyed it most of the time. I had a lot of stresses that if I would have just lived in the present and allowed, do your best and allow it to flow as it does, I
Yeah.
could have enjoyed it a lot more.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating that you bring that up because so that's every year I try to have like a word of the year or a focus. And this year for 2022, it's just to be present. Um,
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
and so that's I find that really interesting that you said that if you would have focused on just being present and where you are, not thinking about the future so much, then it would have made it easier.
Hmm.
Because I've heard it
Right.
said that the cause of depression is looking at the past, and the cause of anxiety is thinking about the future. And
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
so instead of just being fully present where you are and just accepting what is and really digging.
That's the thing. That was the lesson that I learned the most out there that I guess I hadn't sunk in prior, probably. Because in Russia I'd learned about cleaning up your mental space and
Yeah,
had all the skills and stuff necessary. But yeah, I was just like, man, I stressed out so much that I didn't even need to. Yeah, that's good
yeah,
a good thing to focus on. And of course, if you're properly prepared in a way, you're never going to be perfectly prepared. But if you've got the right foundation for whatever situation you're in, it's just you just lean into that and don't worry about what happens. It is what happens.
yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it sounds like from your background that you were pretty well prepared going into it. So I'd love to dig into your origin story there, and you're about hopping on the trains and stuff like that.
Yeah. So we grew up on a farm, and then of course we all got our jobs pretty young. And my first job was when I was 13, moving irrigation lines for a ranch, and that was twice a day, 7 days a week, all summer. So pretty. And then after that is then I worked at a little theme park. Then I worked at a concrete factory and the salad dressing plant. Anyway, so we're just working along. And my brother in that time, he was 5 years older than me, and he went down and hitchhiked down to Reno to visit a friend, but he enjoyed being out and the freedom of traveling, but he really didn't like hitchhiking because you got to rely on other people. And somehow along the way, he ran into some hobos, I guess you'd call them, and they invited him to hop on the train with them or whatever. And so he did, and he ended up loving it, and he ended up just riding freight trains for what would be the next 7 or 8 years. He pretty
Wow.
much just traveled the whole time, and at one point, he had been doing it for several years and invited me to come along, and I was about 18 or 19, and I was like, man, I guess I'm just working. I might as well mix it up. So I agreed and hopped on a train with him, and yeah, we rode across the country, and I spent, better part of a summer just riding trains with him and stuff, and he showed me all the ropes. And then kind of at the end of that summer, I decided to head back to Idaho, and so I rode trains back
Wow.
uh, by myself, which was my first significant amount of time alone, and so that was
Yeah.
interesting. But yeah, the whole time it's preparation. I feel like living that lifestyle was my first taste of. Well, it's interesting. It's so different. It's a lot more urban based than your wilderness life would
Sure.
be. But uh, it was the first taste of the vibe you get when you live, say, with the natives in Siberia, or live as people have always lived for all of history, where you wake up and you don't have a schedule. You just have certain needs you need to meet, and all you have to do is think about how do I meet these needs, and then you move on. It's very in the moment, unscheduled, free flowing. And I feel like it's sort of what we're all designed to thrive in, but that's one of the things we've lost in modern society, is the is the ability to really tap into that um, flowing state of being. We do end up very scheduled and very routine and
Very
all
much
that.
so.
Yeah, yeah. So, and like you talked about earlier, we live a lot more in the past and the future than than you do when you're in a situation like that. And so that was my first taste of that type of a lifestyle, and I really liked it. And it was, you have all kinds of, just a young guy, and had all kinds of just every night you don't know where you're going to sleep, and it's an adventure, and Sometimes you might go to jail, or sometimes you might meet some really cool folks. It's just a whole gamut of experiences. So
Yeah. I'd love to hear some of the craziest stories that you experience while being a
uh,
hobo on trains.
yeah, I mean, I guess the one that I guess pops in my head was just funny because we were in Chicago and just minding our own business, uh, checking out the sights, and a cop car drove up, but he like he was hauling and he sped past us and slammed on his brakes like and shoved it into reverse, peels out and like slams up on the curb in front of us and like stops in front of us. We're like, whoa, dude. And he jumps out and he's like, what the F are you guys doing in my town? And we're like, whoa. He was like super aggro. And he's like, oh, we're gonna see how many drugs you guys got in those packs. And of course, we didn't have any, but the guy was just aggro as could be. And then
Wow.
he's like, give me your IDs. And so we gave him, and then gave them to him, and he's he's like, well, you guys are gonna be sorry you ever showed up here. And goes sits in his car, but then he gets out. And he was like this big ripped dude. You could tell he was just a jerk of a dude. But he gets out,
chip on his shoulder,
about ready to do whatever he was going to do to us. And we were below a skyscraper they were working on, and a nail fell from the heavens and knocked his glasses off right at the moment he was stepping up out of his car. And knocked his glasses off. And he just threw our IDs on the ground. He's like, I'm going to go have me a construction worker. And jumped in his car and like sped off. And we're like, whoa. The nail from the heavens. It was amazing. It's just a funny little anecdote of a story that happened. But it's stuff like that happens very often. Very often it's super boring. Like you'll be waiting for 8 hours in one spot for a train and nothing's happened, or days sometimes. We had at one point, we were sitting in some abandoned factory just waiting for a train, and it's been a few days, and you get super bored. You can't really leave too far because the train might come, and so you're just sitting there. We found this big old roll of aluminum foil, and oh, sweet! So we built these. And what you would do over the course of a few days sitting there, we built these huge aluminum foil hats with all this stupid, look like a bunch of idiots out there. And then one night, we're just sitting there waiting for the train, and some minivan pulled up and was waiting for a train that was going too fast, and we like out of boredom like walk over there and like start circling her car, which is probably ill-advised, but the poor lady just looked at us like and shoved it in reverse, sped off. We're like, oh, who knows? She's probably still telling the story of the factory. We were just bored. Sorry, ma'am.
So, from what I understand, most of the train lines, they don't actually want people just boarding trains and taking them for a ride. So,
right, yeah, you want to be low key about it. Sometimes it's really based on the individuals who cares and who doesn't. I'd say the majority of like workers and folks don't really care. You could sometimes even ask a worker where's a train going, and he might tell you. But of course, you always get the people that do. And so, of course, it's for the train. I'm sure it's a liability if people get injured on there and stuff. So they don't want you on there. So, yeah, you either have to be stealthy or deal with the consequences of your actions.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is nice. There's something nice about it because it's not like driving, so you're not always on a road having to pay attention, and you're not seeing billboards. The trains always follow rivers and stuff, so you're always going through some beautiful areas. Animals aren't so afraid of them, so you just see a lot, and you go through some pretty awesome parts of the country, especially in those western routes and stuff. But
was there a favorite place that you rode through?
I just remember, it was the time when I was alone, and I had this whole ordeal getting on a train. I finally got on one, and I was heading from Minneapolis out west, and you go through for days of just flat terrain, and that first time you see those mountains in Montana or whatever, you're just like, oh, because it also meant like, oh, you're almost home, you're getting closer to home, and it's just that feeling that all those people on the wagon trains, I'm sure, got to, there they are, there's something about that, that moment that's pretty neat.
For sure.
But you see a lot of, what's cool is you see a lot of abandoned factory, a lot of cool stuff to
Mm-hmm.
explore in that genre.
Lot of history there, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about living in Siberia with reindeer herders and fur trappers. So, and I'm
Right.
thinking that experience is what really prepared you as far as having that skill set to go on to alone.
Yeah, I'd say even mentally and physically. So when we rode trains, we ended up in Virginia and would do temporary work for a guy in order to, earn money to buy our food and stuff. And when I was in Virginia at one point, uh, I had an adopted brother who found his like biological family and when he was in his 20s, and he turns out he had a biological brother that was also going to go to Russia, and the guy told me about it, and he said, "Oh, I'm going to go help this guy build a missionary or this missionary guy build an orphanage over there if you want to come." And I was like, "Well, yeah," it sounded like the right thing to do. So I went over. I got a ticket for a year, went over there, and the guy that we were helping out was super awesome. He's just one of the most well-read, fascinating guys I know. But I also wanted to live with a Russians, so I could learn the language and
Yeah.
and figure out the culture better. And sure enough, there was uh, a guy in a neighboring village whose wife had just been admitted into the hospital, and he had two kids, and he had to go to work, and he's like, "Oh." And my buddy called him and was like, "Hey, I got this American. Would you want him to live with you?" And he was like, "Oh, that would be amazing. I was just praying about it." He's like, my wife's in the hospital. Send him over." And so he sent me over there, and I lived basically with bounced between two Russian families for the first year I was there, and they had both been in prison together, so they were real close friends. But yeah, both had spent like considerable terms in Siberian prisons.
Oh,
Both had like found God in prison together, and so they were all close. And then and there was another buddy they had up in the fire. So that was just regular village Russian life, which was cutting hay with a scythe, and all that kind of
yeah.
old fashioned stuff, milking the cow every morning. And uh, I think that was where I felt the most isolated I've felt in life, which alone felt like it wasn't even close. I wasn't even close. Never
Mm.
felt as alone on
Really?
alone, because uh, just when you're for a year when you don't speak the language, and I was learning it the best I could, but maybe it was also a fact I was younger at the time too or something. But for whatever reason, I just would just lay in bed and be like, "Man, I would not wish this on anybody. This
Mm.
is so I was so miserable at times. It was cool and interesting, but the isolation of it was very difficult. And you're always misunderstood because uh you can't figure out humor yet because you don't have the language skills, and you screwing up like, and you might be good at what you do in America, but when you go over there, everything's a little different and this and that. And so you just it was I found it to be pretty difficult. And many times on alone I thought, no, this isn't, I guess I already learned that lesson, like that lesson of isolation. And it was harder in Russia. But anyway, that first year I lived with them, and then they're really good friends. And um, one of the guys said, "Hey, I got a buddy up in the north. He's a fur trapper and a native. You should go live with him." And eventually I made that connection, and he invited me to northern Siberia there, where he was a fur trapper. So he invited me out to his lands. He's also a native Evenki guy, which is the reindeer herding tribe.
Hmm.
He himself was a trapper, but if you've ever seen that Happy People documentary, you should. It's on YouTube. It's really good. But Happy People, it's called, and there's a 4-part dubbed over Russian version that's better than the Werner Herzog version. Because anyway, so look for that 4-part series, and it's a really good show. But it was basically doing that, fur trapping with this guy, and he liked what I did. We became good friends, and that was again another experience alone where he just kind of dropped me off at a cabin, and 5 weeks later we were going to meet up at this other cabin, and he kind of showed me the ropes, how to set the traps and what to do, and that was that. And so just providing for myself out there and having all, you have all kinds of, again, crazy experiences that but you're just by yourself, which is really interesting. So this also played into alone too. Is like, man, I had this amazing experience in Siberia where I was, at times I fell through the ice and I was lost at times and I had all kinds of like just crazy experiences, but you realize, oh, they're just all in my head. And as soon as this is over, I'm going to forget about it. And that's that, and which I thought was a big bummer because it was such a profound experience as you're having it. But when I was on alone later, I noticed a lot of people really didn't like the cameras, but I actually really appreciated the camera because it was like, oh, this is a way to share this experience with people. Whereas when I was in Siberia, I had an amazing experience, but no way to share it.
Wow.
Batteries on my camera died the first day. So it was, so it was just, I felt that was a great opportunity to share that on alone that I didn't have in Siberia. That said, after I fur trapped with him and all that, he took me out to his cousins who are all native nomads. So he took me out on the snowmobile, basically dropped me off at this, teepees and introduced me. And the guys were immediately, because it was from their, friend or whatever cousin there that vouched for me. And they were like, hey, take this guy. He's awesome. And he's the only good American, just as if they knew any other.
Yeah.
Then they brought me in like I was one of them, and the first time I was there, I was only there a few months, but I really liked their way of life, and so then I went back and would continue to go back for some years, and it was. Yeah, I actually talked to one of them this morning. They came in from the woods to the village, to do something, and she sent me a message, just Happy New Year or whatever. So cool. I still stay in touch with the natives, and I do really want to go back over there. Such a fascinating way of life.
Yeah. What's interesting about Siberia, I remember reading an article about a year ago. There was a family that lived really deep in the Siberian wilderness, and
I heard about them.
Yeah, like before communism had taken over, and so they were discovered, and so they had no idea anything that was going on, just because they had just been living by themselves alone. It was a family, I guess.
So there's a cool little subculture, I guess you'd call it over there, called the Old Believers, which I guess would be like Amish.
Okay.
There was a schism in the Orthodox Church back in maybe it was the 1700s, and a lot of these people went off into the wilderness and basically just forged their own path from then through the Soviet times until now. And that lady was particularly isolated, that family. But there are several of these little Old Believer villages. Then I went to one of them, and it was super fascinating. It was similar to Amish, but just a little more hardcore.
Those Russians.
And it was like, man, it was really neat. They gave me a big jar of just cow cream that you could stand your fork up in. But it was in the middle of the summer. We were boating through on the river, and we had stopped in, and we just had to eat that whole gallon, me and my Evenki friend, that whole gallon of cream. But man, it was so good. I don't know. I'll always remember that from the Old Believers up there.
Great. Jordan, so how did you go about getting on to the show?
Yeah, so like you said, it's a pretty good show. It was probably the only show I watched, really, but my buddy had told me about it. He's like, hey, you should check this show out. And when I watched it, the season 1 had come out and season 2 was airing or something. So I watched the first 2 seasons, and then we were like, shoot, we should sign up for that. And so my buddy never did, but I actually, that evening after I watched the second season, I was like, I sent him in a link to my YouTube videos, which was living with the natives in Siberia. And they watched him, but then, I guess I was too late for season 3. Season 4 was teens. Season 5 was returnees. And so it wasn't until like 3 years or 4 years later that they had an opportunity to put me on, and I had completely forgot about the show, about that I had applied. It just wasn't even anything in my head. I was just working away in DC, building this driveway, and then I got a call, and they're, hey, this is, casting from Malone, and we want you to be on season 6. And I was just like, what? Whoa, I forgot. Like, I got to go catch up on the show, and then, but yeah, that was a big surprise. But I was like, man, I can't really say no. It was quite an opportunity,
Yeah.
to use. And of course, I didn't know how it was going to go. You never know how it's going to go, but great opportunity. So I went ahead and kept the doors kept opening, and I kept going through them until I was dropped off, I guess.
So what was the preparation like for that?
I was mostly concerned that I am a very thin person with a high metabolism. I was just like, and if you watch all the prior seasons, there's a lot of starving going on, and even the people that won were usually starving. So I was like, man, if it is like that, there's no way I'm gonna win. But I had the um, encouraging knowledge of having lived in a similar environment and not only while fur trapping, living off the land, but also with the natives. So it was like, well, I know you can. I know it's possible. And it was kind of funny because prior to the show, I would of course go on Reddit and see what people were saying and stuff, and they would all be like, oh, they do all the math. There's a really big YouTuber guy that wanted to get on the show but never did or something. So then he would always talk about how dumb the show is and just broke it down about how there's no way to win except by getting fat and starving, and he had all the caloric this and that. And I was reading it, and it's like, hey, kind of convincing, but man, I know it's possible. so I was like, man, I'm just going to go out there and, I know my only stress is food. So that's the only thing I have to worry about. I'm not going to freeze. I'm not going to be lonely, nothing like that. So all my energy went into getting food and, above everything else. And from the minute I was dropped off, so my preparation was trying to put on weight the best I could, and brushing up on random skills that that you don't always need except in a situation like alone, like super random skills of
give me an example.
Whatever. Yeah, I was starting to talk and now I can't even think of an example. But oh well, I did snare a bunch of groundhogs in the backyard there in Virginia. Just try out some different things, but of course that doesn't take a lot of, I don't know. Yeah, that was one thing I did, but what are the skills that I didn't have that I was like, man, I better brush up on that? There definitely are some, and I'm sadly, bow drill, like doing a bow drill fire.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's like, oh, that's a good thing to know in case you lose your ferro rod. Sure. It was something I hadn't prior learned, but
Yeah. So from what I understand, everyone is given the option of what gear that they want to bring with them. What is 5 items, 10 items, something like that?
Yeah, 10 items. Yep.
And so how did you decide which items you wanted to bring with you?
There's probably 5 of the items that are pretty much standard everybody takes, which is like a sleeping bag, some kind of a pot or a pan, some kind of a knife or a Leatherman, all this. There's several that everybody takes. And then everything else was something that could hopefully provide me food. So fishing hooks and a bow and an arrow, which prior to my season, a lot of people didn't take bows and arrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, fishing hooks. The guy before me won the show without even bringing fishing gear.
Wow.
And paracord, so I could make a fishing net, and all kinds of just stuff like that. And it was usually stuff that would help me to gather food. And the only exception to that, and it was my only it would be my only future item change potentially, would be that I took a saw to save calories. And I knew better, but up in the north, all the trees are about the size of your arm, so you can chop them down with an axe in 2 swings anyway. So you don't really need a saw. And it did. I was hoping it would save calories, and it did. But I probably should have. If I had hindsight, say I was on season 7 and I got to watch season 6, I would have definitely taken the gill net right away and then made a second one rather than making one later on. Yeah. I just didn't, you live and learn. I didn't realize you could catch such huge lake trout right off the shore up at that lake. Usually they're kind of a deep water fish, but anyway. Yeah.
So every season of Alone is a little bit different as far as the location where they have it. So I'm curious how, if you were not in such a cold environment, something that you were familiar with living in Siberia, how that would have affected the outcome for you.
Well, it depends. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in more temperate environments. Like now I live in Montana and, grew up in Idaho. So all those places north, are there's a pretty good path forward in survival, and honestly, the farther south you go, it almost just gets easier. It just depends on where you are, of course. In the desert, there's not many resources, and I wouldn't want to do that. So there's definitely places that are more or less conducive to that type of a show. What's better about the northern regions is that there really is. Um, what I like about it is it rewards activity in people.
Ah,
So, like people that are if you're gonna be really active and try to hunt and try to trap and try to snare, it can pay off. There's definitely places they could do the show, and they have in the past where there just aren't that many opportunities. So either you've got one chance at one thing, or you better just sitting in your shelter
yeah.
and not wasting calories. And so I like where I was on it because it rewarded activity and that's what I needed.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So has nature and the outdoors always been important to you, Jordan?
Yeah, definitely. It always has been. My dad wasn't a hunter, so hunting came kind of later in my life after I went to Siberia, and then every year always hunting out there, and then I came back to the States and got into archery a lot more, and so I've provided ever since all our meat basically, but uh aside from that, yeah, it's always been a big part, and it's only grown over time. The more I've spent time outdoors, the more I realize it's necessary, and there's a lot of good that we've missed out on, in the modern world. We've got so much, which is amazing, but living the best time ever. But we've lost some things along the way that we don't even recognize. So
Yeah, for sure.
trying to tap into that is important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we named our company Rewild Gear, is because we want to encourage
Uh-huh.
people to get back in the outdoors and rewild themselves and reconnect with
Right.
nature, because we've lost so much of that.
So much. It's so important. Yeah. And it's even now, right? Rewild is a great name because it is a it's so necessary for people, especially, I noticed it, especially the last couple of years where people are so politically fired up. And so there's so many things to be mad at each other about. But if you're out in the woods and you're just living, it's
Yeah.
so different. And even, you can be with somebody that's of a total different political persuasion. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden you're just two people in the woods,
Mother
you
Nature is
know?
the great equalizer.
Yeah, totally. It's really nice. Yeah. I think people need more of it for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
She doesn't care what your political views are, how much money you have.
Totally.
It's all about your skill set. Yeah.
Right.
Jordan, so I'm curious how life has changed after being on the show, because a lot of people that go on a reality
Yeah.
show or get some modicum of fame, and what's changed for you since then? I know you've started like your survival school.
Yeah. So not a lot has changed. It feels the same, except that uh, I guess the three things that have changed are: one is it gave us the ability to get some land out here in Montana and move out here, and it probably the most tangible and my favorite thing that's come of it was being able to do those wilderness courses like Carla came on, your
Yeah.
friend, and they've just been so awesome because it's way better than doing construction.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's really necessary. It's been really good for people. It's been one of the most rewarding things about doing it is seeing what people say about the courses, and you're just like, man, this is cool. This is like really good for people. So it's motivating to keep it going, and that's been awesome to be able to transition from just renovating houses and stuff
Mhm.
to teaching these skills up in the wilderness is amazing, and
Yeah.
introducing people to just life in the outdoors, people that haven't often put their phone down for a day, and then third, oh well, yeah, that's about it. And third, I get to have like random fun conversations with people
Yeah.
occasionally that,
Yeah. Cool. Tell me more about the survival school and all the courses that you're putting on.
yeah, so it's the last couple of years I've just been doing them out in the wilderness here, and usually we do take people in on horseback and do about 6 days up in the wilderness, try to get to some really remote places. I've used it as an opportunity to try to go places that I would want to go,
Yeah.
which makes it more exciting for me. And I think that affects everybody else too. And so I just pick places that I really want to go and invite people to come along with me. And then I try to tap into what we were talking about earlier, where I don't have a super strict schedule. I have a lot of things that I want to teach and cover, but I want people to also feel the freedom of that, wilderness life
Yeah.
kind of. And so if we go up there and, maybe we're going to do fire building this morning, but all of a sudden, oh, we hear wolves howling over there. Maybe we should try to howl the wolves in, or maybe we should call those elk in, so, or maybe they're just a cool mountaintop everybody wants to go try climb to, let's do that. And so we do that. And I also, so I don't know, keep it open, but they're just amazing. I mean, you can't go wrong for a week up in some of these beautiful areas, just catching fish and learning all the skills that I think are, one thing that was nice for me going on the show is that I could tell having lived with the natives, I knew what people practically used, what skills have kind of the wheat and the chaff have been separated by them.
Yeah.
So, what you're going to need and what you don't need. And so I just try to teach people a basic skill set that can help them. Then my goal would really be, and most people aren't going to find themselves on a loan or something, but my goal would be able to, that people could then feel confident to do the same thing, like go up in the woods and spend a week with themselves or them and their family or their friends and, open up that whole aspect of the world for them would be awesome, And sometimes all you need is a kick and just a little bit of a knowledge base to be able to do that. So
for sure. What gear are you sending everyone out with?
Pretty basic gear. So we're I want people to build their own fishing rods and build their own, and kind of tie up their own lures. And so I kind of keep it simple. It's kind of alone-ish style on the gear, so that just keep it so that if you can catch a fish with a little lure you just hammered out of a tin can, then it's only going to be easier in the future if you actually have real stuff. So kind of like it's more gratifying. It's really fun to make a rod and put it all together and go and catch a fish and fry it up. It's just the whole experience. Like, oh man, I can do this without almost anything. It's pretty neat. So I keep it fairly simple. There's certain things I don't make people do, like make your own cordage and stuff, because then that's your whole class would be a week of you making 10 feet of cordage.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So the food you guys are eating, are you bringing anything in with you?
Yeah, so we bring in food, and then on the last day, I just have everybody, because I don't want to hammer the land too hard. So if you bring everybody and they're providing, well, there's two reasons. One, if everybody's just trying to survive for a week off of these little mountain lakes and stuff, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But two is if you're surviving and you really need to get your own food, that's all you do. That's what you need to be doing all the time.
Yeah.
And here we're trying to learn also. And so on the days where we're doing a lot of learning, then we have food. And then on the, then we usually go on a little expedition to maybe some other lake at the end. And that expedition is unfed, provide for yourself off the land with the skills you've learned.
Yeah.
And then, but that's what I've been doing. Actually, this year I got some llamas too. So I'm going to be able to maybe do some smaller scale courses, just, maybe 5 or 6 folks, take them up with the llama helping pack food and gear and do more like of a backpacking style, wilderness trips, which could be a lot of fun. And again, open up just a lot of new areas to go and this and that. So that, and I am, thinking about what some winter courses might look like and stuff. So I'm looking to try to expand more, but I have to balance it with family. So
of course,
don't want to overdo it. So just trying to find the right balance.
Yeah.
I don't want to be gone the whole summer and then all of hunting season and then, whatever.
Yeah. Now, do you do a lot of hunting as well, Jordan?
Fair amount. Like I said, I've always Not a lot. Like if you go on, the internet's great because if you do something, there's always people that do it a lot more and a lot better. So there are definitely people that hunt a lot more than I do, but I definitely, try to and usually succeed at feeding the family. I always want to keep a full freezer and that's my main purpose behind hunting, other than that I really enjoy it and it's a great experience to be outside. So usually uh a little too practical. So once I'll fill my freezer and then it's hard for me to buy like out of state tags and
Yeah.
and all that. So but I'll go with friends and then help them fill their freezer and stuff. So yeah, I do a lot of hunting usually, but
Yeah.
relatively.
What are you typically hunting?
What's that?
What species are you typically hunting?
Mostly what I've done, because I've been out east for the last 12 years. So it's mostly whitetail and occasionally a bear and occasionally, stuff like that. But now I'm really enjoying the elk hunting out west here and been getting some elk and some
nice
that to the mix and stuff
Oh yeah.
So yeah, some more western species. But now I want to try. Well, I guess that's a hot topic, but I think predator management's a big part of the whole thing, the North American conservation method. And so I'd like to. There's really heavy wolf predation, and Carla, who came on our course, could probably speak to that. But there's not a lot of animals in the wilderness up here because they've kind of all been eaten out. So I'd like to
Oh wow.
thin the wolf pot. There are tons of wolves, but not so many. Like you'll see a moose, and then the next week you'll find the dead moose. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just like a lot of pressure. So I'd like to maybe get one or two of those just to do my part here a little bit.
I'd love to hear your take just kind of on the whole conservation movement, because that means different things to different people.
Yeah. So what I think is awesome about America, having lived in Russia, is that we have a organized like conservation strategy and a society that's high enough trust that people aren't just poaching all the time anyway. And so what that's done is it's allowed, you might live in town and see deer all the time. I guarantee you that never happens in Russia. It's everything that comes to town gets shot by someone. So you get these big dead zones around villages. And I really like that America's done that differently. I am a little bit wary of there's like the most recent trend of putting like biology to vote. I feel like I would really like to know that there's biologists figuring out what the land can sustain of each type of species, from grizzlies and wolves on down to, elk and whatever prey species, and figuring out what a good balance is and then implementing it. Yeah. When you put it to vote, it just doesn't make sense. It's just like, well, that's a cool animal. Of course I want that out there. And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's a good trend, but but only because I was actually. So I think what needs to go hand in hand with hunting and providing your food and stuff is also some degree of predator management. Not annihilating them, but just keeping them at numbers that are not causing this big ebb and flow in game populations that.
Sure.
And anyway, so whatever, something to do with that.
Gotcha.
But I do appreciate America and the fact that we have a lot of game relatively, probably just, and that people in general don't shoot everything they see, which is nice.
Yeah. Jordan, what's the biggest life lesson that nature and the outdoors has taught you over the years through all these different experiences?
Well, I mean, I guess priorities, like, I don't know. I mean, of course, that's a broad question. I would have a long time trying to answer it, but the first thing that popped to mind is really knowing your priorities and knowing that in it all, like when my dad died, I know what he valued at the end of his life. He valued the time he spent with his family. He valued the time, and he regretted the time that he wouldn't have in the future. So it's like you want to learn those lessons from the people that came before us. And prioritizing my family and loved ones, and also helping them see what is beautiful about, because in that we all probably, if you're a parent, people that are parents probably like, man, the world's crazy, like what a weird time to parent, things are changing fast and it's hard to keep up. But I think having a foundation that can keep the kids, I think having them in nature and experiencing that keeps them grounded and gives them an outlet. And I think my faith is valuable to me, and just having, yeah, I don't know, all that kind of weave together as my foundation, just
Yeah,
knowing what your base is that you're working out of is helpful.
that makes sense.
But yeah, because you have all those experiences. I definitely had times in Russia where I'd mess out in Siberia on this reindeer in the middle of nowhere, just this epic experience, and you're just like, huh, that's funny. This is amazing, and this is about as epic as you can get. But I recognize a little bit the vanity of it. Like I'm gonna forget it, and it's just gonna be gone. It's just me out here in the woods. Like what? Who
Yeah.
cares? But so experience wasn't everything. It's all kind of comes tied back to love and your family and your friends.
Sure. Do you feel that having those experiences with others that magnifies it more?
Yeah, so that's been a neat thing about. So I'm not the type of person that just wants to go in the woods and never see anyone ever again. I like people, and uh that was one thing I thought on alone was like, well, this is fine. I didn't feel too lonely out there, but boy, if I knew I was the last person on earth and that I'd never see anyone again, I probably wouldn't even bother. Like it's interesting to like, oh yeah, it's not without others in some point you're not going to want to do it. But I really value people. And these courses have been great because not only do you get to spend time in the wilderness, but you get to be up there with really interesting and great folks. So it's like
Yeah.
kind of the best of both worlds. But uh yeah, I forget what your question was exactly, but I do like people. They're a big part of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Totally. Kind of the meaning of it, I think.
Right, exactly. It was a very clear thought I had when I was on alone. And it was funny because I wasn't particularly lonely. I was just like, well, man, if it was just me left, it's funny because I'm having fun, but you would quickly think, what's the point? Like,
Sure.
well, so you need people,
Yeah.
even if you think you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Jordan, what's a crazy outdoor adventure experience that you've had that you would not want to repeat?
Well, I guess the one that first pops into mind was just when falling through the ice when I was fur trapping in Siberia, because you're alone and you don't and it was a river that in probably places it was probably frozen 6 feet deep, but I wanted to I kind of lost where I was, and so I was going to go out on the river to get a better view of the contour of the mountains and be like, oh yeah, my trap's over there. So I was like stepping back into the river to get a better view, and must have been like an upwell underneath the ice, which of course can happen. But sure enough, boom, when I plunged through, it was just my full leg, like I caught myself, just my leg went in, but it was cold and it was the middle of Siberia and my matches got soaked, and I was just like, man, what do I do? Should I go 4 miles back to the cabin I started, or go to the next 3 miles up to the next one? And you're debating like, and so then I went to the one that was closer, and thank God I did, because by the time I got there, my leg was just dead, and I was like, man, I was miserable, but I'd had a couple experiences like that out there, big learning experiences for me, and um, yeah, and sometimes I found myself lost and just stuck in the wood. You'd be on these snow skis that keep you on, it's maybe 3 or 4 foot of that dry powder you get when it's really cold. It's a really deep snow, but you have these Siberian skis that keep you on top of them. Well, then I got into some forest fire that the trees were too close together to use the skis, so I had to take them off and trudge through this deep snow. And it was a long story, and I won't bore you with the whole thing, but just super miserable. And this was when I was actually wearing this coat, and I had some matches in my pocket up here, which was dumb of me. And snow falls on your shoulder and melts and gets them wet, and
I
then
know.
I went to like, man, I'm so thirsty. I need to melt some snow. And I went to start a fire and I couldn't. I was like, oh crap. Here's where a bow drill would come in handy, but I don't know if I would have bothered. But
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the river. But then I got to where I could go down to the river, and then it was just a cliff between me and the river for who knows how long in
Oh,
every
man.
direction. So I just had to. It was ended up finally making it to the cabin I was trying to get to, in the middle of the night, and I stumbled in. I was exhausted and super, just worn out. And what was funny is it just so happened that that native guy that I was trapping with came in that same night even later than me, and we'd both just been through these miserable experiences. Who knows what had happened? And I
Oh,
like laid
man.
down in my bed, and he came in. I was like, "Oh, how was like, hey, Yura, how was your day?" Like, you know, yeah, I hadn't seen him for weeks. It sucked, and he went to sleep, and I went to sleep, and it's like that's all you. I don't know what happened to him,
Yeah.
what horrible experiences he went through that day, but it's just funny. It's all just summed up, and it sucks. Go to sleep, wake up the next day, and do it again. But
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, but no, that pops into mind. But
Jordan, what outdoor gear do you consider essential that you always take with you for any type of situation that you might find yourself in?
well, now good. I always have like a ferro rod with me or some kind of fire starting ability, which lighters can be a little unreliable. So something,
Mhm.
I always take that. I always, like, as far as like spending time in the woods, I think an axe is invaluable. And like a lot of the natives will say, if you have an axe, you can survive with nothing
Hmm.
else, basically, if you know what you're doing. So that's a big essential tool. It's not something you always take in an American context,
Sure.
'cause, but um, that's an essential tool. And then like little like fishing gear. I like to have a few little fishing things,
Mhm.
just because that's gonna be your base if you ever need it. So like a survival kit wouldn't have to be a lot. It wouldn't have to have a lot if I was going to strip it way down. You need a fire, some kind of basic food, some kind of basic cutting. A Leatherman. I always have a
Mhm.
Leatherman. There you go. There's a answer. but and you can do a lot with just those things,
Yeah.
but the right knowledge. But yeah. So fire starter, Leatherman, and you're set. And probably what I would recommend is hooks, like fishing hooks and some kind of string, because making that stuff is incredibly impractical.
Especially if it's really cold or your fingers are freezing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, that's the worst. Like you all think you can do it, but wait until you actually need to do it. It's a whole different situation. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
Jordan, are there any brands that you just love who just do a fantastic job of the quality of their gear?
Let's see, brands. That's a good question. I mean, I really like the guys at Kifaru that make like hunting
Mhm.
packs and teepees. So for one, the owner, and that means a lot. It's been really generous and really nice, a cool dude.
Yeah. Aaron,
Aaron
yeah.
Snyder, and but their gear's awesome. So their packs are really well made. I really like them, and the teepee that I got from them is, I take my family up in it, and we spend weeks together. It's just like a great piece of gear. Uh, the natives would love one. It'd be fun to take them one someday. But it's so lightweight, quick to set. That's cool. I like Kafar. I like I mean I could rattle off a bunch, but yeah, the clothing gear is a funny one because it's like, but it's kind of your taste too. I mean, I wore all that Kuiu gear on alone, and I think their gear's awesome. I really liked it. I think I haven't used all the other brands,
Yeah.
so I can't really say compare this and that. But I've heard the guys that run Sitka are real cool guys, and all the gear I've had of Sitka is really good. And same with Cryptek. I've heard they're awesome
Yeah.
folks down in Idaho. So I don't know, just whatever. I think it's kind of preference. I like Siberian nomadic reindeer fur boots in the cold winters. Those are the ones to get if you can get your hands on them. I like also, so I want to make an axe. I haven't quite made it happen yet, but those Siberian
Mhm.
axes they use, like they're they're just better than any axe I can get in the States, which to me is very bizarre because it's such a simple
Yeah.
tool.
What's
But
different about them?
well, they have a broad cutting bit, so a lot of those Gransford Brooks and stuff have like really narrow cutting bits, which is kind of annoying. They have a wide eye also, which the Gransford Brooks and stuff don't have. So they're less likely to break, and you can also then put the handle in like a slip-on, kind of like a tomahawk,
Hmm.
where you slide it through, and which is I like better than a wedge. And then the Evenki will sharpen them from one side so that they kind of have a chisel grind,
Okay.
so that working with it, like doing fine work with it, is a lot more effective. All that to say, it's like you can't quite find an axe in the States with those features, and
Huh.
and so maybe I've brought some over from Russia, but they're kind of hit or miss on steel
Yeah.
quality. So it'd be cool to make
Might
a
be an opportunity there.
good forest axe. Oh, for sure. Yeah, totally. Um, so we'll see. It's a bit. We've talked to like producers and using high grade steel and all that, and it's definitely a big investment. So it's a little scared of the risk,
There.
but the world needs it. And then yeah. Anyway, a few
Yeah.
things. Yeah, brands. I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of brands I like, but won't go too long on
Yeah.
that.
Jordan, is there a book or books that have had a big impact on your life?
Yeah, I think the one that impacted me the most, just because of when I read it, was the Gulag Archipelago. I probably read when I was 20, 21, and uh, I read a lot of those kind of heavier books when I was young. And they really put a lot of perspective on life. You can learn a lot from others' experiences and the wisdom of others. And fortunately, by reading what Solzhenitsyn observed and bore witness to in Russia and stuff, you just think, man, the amount of suffering that the people went through, and best puts anything that I could have complained about in my own life in perspective, for one. But it also shows you the value of, like, he talked a lot about like happiness not quite being your highest goal, and I think that was a really important lesson for me as a young. You hear that a lot, just be happy, but he would have, and then he would bring forth examples of these people that, for the sake of their own life, would trample everybody else down around them. But he's like, but the people that were really lights in those prison camps were like those grandmas who just were like a little candle in that hellish environment, and they died just like everybody else, but they were like, they kept their souls intact. And I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. So like following, having that slightly higher purpose than just happiness was, but also not, and also having perspective on my suffering. Reading a book like that when I was what I was allowed me to kind of do some of the things that I did without leaving when it was miserable.
Yeah. We'll definitely add that into the show notes. Do
Yeah.
you have a favorite podcast that you listen to?
I like Dan Carlin, Hardcore History. That's a good one. And then I like, what other ones do I look forward to coming out? I've been listening to one called The Fall of Civilizations, which is a well done podcast. I like history stuff. I listen to a lot of audiobooks and a lot of history and this and that. So those two podcasts I recommend.
Great. We'll definitely get those added in the show notes as well. Jordan, what's one piece of advice you would leave with our audience today?
Yeah, take the time, I guess. A lot of times what's cool when you go out in the wilderness is you have time to think deeply, which is something we amazingly don't have very often anymore with our phones and distraction all around. So take the time to think deeply about what matters to you and organize your life around that, and yeah, I think that's important. So we live at an amazing time right now where you're not going to starve to death. Like if you're trying to keep up with the Joneses, you can keep pretty busy. But if you figure out what your priorities are, we actually have the potential to align our lives with them. So I'd say take the time to figure out what they are. Don't just keep you know, trudge along without a thought towards that.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Thank you. And just to wrap up today, where can people learn about you online?
I'm mostly on Instagram, so that's the best place. It's at hobojordo. But then I also have a website that has jordanjonas.com, has more information on the courses, which I think a few people canceled. So they were full, but now there's a few openings. And then I'm going to be releasing more weeks of, at some point here in the future. So if you follow Instagram, which goes to Facebook also, or go on my website. I have a mailing list there that people can sign up for, so you don't have to be on Instagram, because I don't recommend it if you don't have to be. And so, go on jordanjonas.com and sign up on the email list, or go to Instagram.
Super. Great. Jordan, thanks so much for your time today. I've had a really enjoyable conversation with you. And
thanks, Seth. Yeah, it's fun. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah. And for all of you guys listening out there, until next time, stay wild.
Thanks for listening to the Rewild Gear Podcast. You could check out the show notes for today's episode at rewildgearpodcast.com. If you're ready to spend more time in the wild, our line of high-quality, minimalistic outdoor gear can help you do just that. Check us out at rewildgear.com.